All right, so turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11. That's where you get David's sin with Bathsheba. Second Samuel chapter 11. So this is lesson 18, David's sin with Bathsheba. David is done with the major battles. We had seen that in the last lesson. He wanted to build something to a house for the Lord because he was done with those major battles, but the Lord said, no, that will be for Solomon to do. Now there are other battles that are going on, and David, probably getting older in his age, decides to stay home from some of them. He lets his right-hand man, his general, Joab, lead the army out there. So that's the situation here. David was not in battle here, probably because he's getting older. Let's just stay at home and relax somewhat. He's the king. He should be out in battle leading the men. That's not the case here. So that's where we pick it up. Chapter 11, verse 1. And it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when the kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the children of Ammon, besieged Rabbah, but David tarried still at Jerusalem. It came to pass in an eventide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers, and took her, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness. And she returned unto her house, and the woman conceived, and sent, and told David, and said, I am with child. And David sent to Joab, saying, Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. So we can imagine the situation here. David is in his palace, which is on Mount Zion. It's a high hill. And as it was in those days, the more important person you were, the closer to the palace you lived, the higher up you had. So if you were an important person, you had a nice view. You could look out your home and look down the hillside into all of Jerusalem surrounding you. Well, David's house, and eventually the house of the Lord, would be built up at the pinnacle on Mount Zion, the top of the hill. David had a vantage point in which probably for 360 degrees he could see all around his home. Look down onto everyone else's place. And David, maybe he arose from a nap, or maybe he had finished his meal and was out for a nice leisurely stroll. And he's standing on top of his wall, the roof of his palace, which would be flat, and he can look out over the city and see the people and the hustle and bustle and what's going down there. And looking down there, he saw a woman bathing. Maybe down in a pool of water, maybe having a bath up on her roof. But either way, he could see her. David could see that she was very beautiful. And because of that, he's not scrupled anymore. Remember, he has many wives. Nothing has stopped him before. He was married to Micah first, but that didn't stop him from marrying Abigail, the Carmelite, and Ahinoam, her handmaid, and then he took more and more and more handmaids and more wives. So to David, it means nothing anymore to take another wife. Now, what's wicked and wretched about this situation is she's married. I don't know of other wives that he had taken. Abigail, the Carmelite, her husband has died. She was eligible to remarry, just not David because he was already married. So in this situation, he's now marrying a woman that is married to another man. That's wicked, that's sinner. He's going in unto her. That's adultery on both of their parts. Did Bathsheba do it on purpose? Was she trying to? Maybe she was lonely at home. Was she trying to tempt him? We don't know. Either way, David saw her and looked upon her beauty. So, we have to be careful. It's a good reminder for all of us, for the men Young boys, beauty is not everything. A godly woman is far above rubies. For the girls to be dressed appropriately is an important thing too, we're reminded of here. But, anyways, David invites her in. He's not inviting her in for a cup of tea or have some snacks. No, he lies with her as though he's married to her. He wanted her for his own wife. If that was sin, that would be wrong. Like we said, it didn't matter anymore to him. He probably had so many. Now, he might justify it in his mind because we read that she was married to Uriah, who was a Hittite, it says there in the Bible. A Hittite? Well, that wasn't an Israelite, so David in his mind may be saying, wow, she shouldn't have married him anyway, so it's much better for her anyways if she were to be my wife. That's not the case. You can imagine this Uriah the Hittite being a godly man. I don't know. But anyways, David throws away the cares of this godly woman here, Bathsheba. He doesn't care about her and the marriage that he's ruining. He doesn't care about Uriah. He cares only about himself. His heart is in the wrong place. So, stayed the evening together, and sometime, probably a few weeks down the road, Bathsheba sent word back to David. She was with child, his child. Well, now what shall they do? Now they're in quite a predicament. Uriah hasn't been home, so he'll know it wasn't his child. What was going on? Well, David has to come up with a plan. That's where we start there, verse 17, or 6. Sorry, I read that already. And David sent to Joab, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah was coming to David, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did, and how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, go down to thy house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down to his house. And when they had told David, saying, Uriah went not down unto his house, David said unto Uriah, camest thou not from thy journey? Why then didst thou not go down into thine house? And Uriah said unto David, the ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of all my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into mine house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? As thou livest and as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing. Let's stop there a second. So, the next day, or probably the next day after that, or maybe even the same day, David, after learning that Bathsheba is with child, he wants to cover up this sin. The way that he can cover it up is to invite Uriah the Hittite to get him out of the battlefield, bring him home and let him go to his wife. And then, when a child is born, Uriah will think that it's his. And that way they can cover up the sin. Well, it doesn't quite work. Uriah comes from the battlefield, and David probably tries to cover up his reasons for, Uriah, how does Joab do? I'm kind of checking on my servant Joab. How's he doing out there? Is he doing a good job? I couldn't ask him myself. I had to get you and bring you in here. You're trustworthy. I wanted to know, how's my man Uriah doing? And how's the battle going and everything else? And Uriah gives him the message. Well, then David says, well, thanks, and why don't you go down to your house and go to your home for a little bit, and you can be with your wife, knowing that he would want to be with his wife that evening. He's been out in the battlefield. And then his wife will think that, or be able to cover up her sin. And Uriah will go back to the battlefield, and all will be well. Well, that's not exactly what happens. Uriah refuses. Maybe he senses something is wrong. Maybe there were rumors that he heard from the servants in the palace. Or maybe it's just Uriah has a good reason here that we read in the Bible. That's what he tells David, at least. He tells David, David, why should I go home to sleep in my comfortable bed, to lie with my wife, to be clean and washed and have all of the luxuries of food, when my brothers are out living in tents in the battlefield, barely scraping by, uncomfortable, probably hot, and here it is that you want me to go to my house. No, I won't do it. So he slept at the king's door. David can't understand it. He becomes upset with Uriah. Why don't you go home? But he won't. Again, maybe he was suspicious. Maybe he had heard something, but he won't go down there. David, his heart being way too clouded. Hey, David is terribly concerned about this situation in himself. So he's going to keep adding to the sin. Now he invites Uriah in and he gives him food and drink and he causes Uriah to get drunk, thinking now that he's drunk he won't think clearly, and then I can tell him to go home and he'll be so drunk he'll say, sure, no problem. He'll go home and he'll lie with his wife and he'll think it's his child that she's great with. But again, that's not the case. Even though he gets Uriah drunk, Uriah will not go home. Uriah will not go to his wife. So, now David even goes another step further. And let's see what that next step is with David's sin. Verse 14, and it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter saying, set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass when Joab observed the city that he assigned Uriah unto a place where he knew the valiant men were. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and there fell some of the people of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. Then Joab sent and told David all these things concerning the war, and charged the messenger, saying, when thou hast made an end of telling the matters of war unto the king, and if so be that the king's wrath arise, and he say, wherefore approached ye so nigh unto the city where ye did fight? Knew ye not that it would shoot from the wall? Who smote Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal? Did not a woman cast a piece of a millstone upon him from the wall, that he died in Thebez? Why went ye nigh in the wall? And then say thou, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. So, imagine Uriah. He's carrying his own death sentence. King David writes a letter to Joab and seals it with a seal and hands it to Uriah and says, Uriah, deliver this to Joab. And in that envelope is Uriah's death sentence. But Uriah carries it, not daring to look into the king's message, and gives it to Joab. Joab opens it, reads it, understands it, and sends Joab off into the front of the battle where the hottest places. He knows where the best fighters of the enemy are, where he's losing most of his men. And that's where he sends Uriah. And Uriah dies out there in the battlefield. And Joab sends the message back to David that the deed is done. What David has required is finished. Okay? Well, David tries to calm himself. David says to the messenger, verse 25, Thus shalt thou say unto Joab, let not this thing displease thee, for the sword devoureth one as well as another. Make thy battle more strong against the city, and overthrow it, and encourage thou him. David, now that he's covered up his sin with another sin, now he's got to try to get it right in his heart, his conscience, right? Your conscience and my conscience, when we sin, pricks us. David was pricked in his heart. So the best way to solve a pricked conscience is just to keep telling yourself that what you did was right, what it did was right, and it wasn't wrong. And soon you'll convince yourself of it, and that conscience will go away. I'm sure we've all been in that situation with our own sins. We've done something wrong. We know we shouldn't have done it. We should be honest and truthful about it, but we don't. We cover it up. And what do? We lie, and we lie, and we lie, and we lie some more. So that pretty soon what happens? The lie in our minds becomes the truth. And now my pricked conscience leaves me alone. Oh, it might come back here and then, but I can quickly pass it away because I've convinced myself that what I did was the right thing. And that's what David says here. Don't be upset, Joab. Nothing bad happened. I mean, it's the hottest part of the battle. What do you expect? Men are going to die. It just happened. His senses are dulled. He's no longer awake and aware of just how horrible his sins are. So, when Bathsheba learns of it, she mourns for a bit. And then she heads to the palace and she becomes the wife of David. And soon a son is born to them. But look at that last verse, the last line, sentence, chapter 11. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. So, how will the Lord fix it? Chapter 12, verse 1, the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and he came unto him and said unto him, There were 2 men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing, save one little ewe lamb, which he had brought and nursed up. And it grew up together with him and with his children, and it did eat of his own meat, and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, to dress for the wayfaring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb, and dressed it for the man that was come to him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and said to Nathan, As the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, Thou art the man. Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I moreover would have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in thy sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with a sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. So, sharp words for David here. Sharp words. David in his self-righteousness, well, let's punish this man with death. And then Nathan says, David, you're that man. You're just like that rich man who had many wives. And here's one godly man who had one wife, and you stole from him and destroyed him for it. You did the same thing. What was God's purpose in bringing Nathan here to David? Well, it was to teach David a lesson. Sharp words were used. And now what would be the consequences of this sin? Look at verse 10. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. So that's the first thing. Your house will always be at war with itself. You won't have peace in your family. You'll be fighting all the time. Verse 11, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor. And he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of thy son. So your many wives that you had yourself, now you're going to share them with other men. David had sinned. It would happen openly. That these women, his wives, would go to other men. These are severe judgments. But severe judgments are for severe sins. And that's what David had done. He had sinned wickedly. Now, the story goes on to though there's a bit, if you skip to verse 15. And Nathan departed his house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. So the child of Bathsheba and David is born, but it comes down with a sickness here. It's very sick. Verse 16. David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted, and went in and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up off the earth. But he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. So David mourns for his child here. He pleads with the Lord. Please, Lord, it's my sin and my iniquity. Don't punish this child because of my wickedness and my sin. David fasted. He refused to eat and drink. His servants tried to implore him, King David, you need your strength, but he refused to do it because he was so wrought from his own sin. He pleaded for the life of his child. But in the end, it would not be so. Verse 18, And it came to pass on the 7th day that the child died. And the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spake unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he then vex himself if we tell him that the child is dead? Servants, seeing how distraught David was when the child was alive, thought, well, at least while the child was alive, it had a chance to live. Now it's dead. David will probably fall to pieces. He'll be maybe even filled with wrath and attack us. How dare we? Who's going to be the one to tell him that his child has died? Will you tell him? Oh, no. They're all arguing amongst each other. You tell him. No, you tell him. No, you tell him. I'm not telling him. Can you imagine if he was this sad? Think how sad he's going to be now. Verse 19, But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto his servants, Is the child dead? And they said unto him, He is dead. And you can imagine them grimacing, hoping David doesn't tear them to pieces. Then David rose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel and came into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he became to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. Then said his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive, but when the child was dead, thou didst rise and eat bread. Servants are confused by David's behavior here. David, you've got it all backwards, man. When the person's alive, we're joyful, we're happy. When somebody dies, we mourn, we're sad. You just did the opposite. While the child was alive, you mourned and you were sad. The child dies, now you're happy and regular. You go back to everyday life. That's not how it goes. For any of us, if we ever lose a loved one, that's not how it goes. We're all happy, right? No one died in your family today, yet. Grandpa and grandma are alive, mom and dad maybe are alive, brothers and sisters are alive. We're happy. It's a good life. Somebody, one of those people I just listed, dies, now you're sad. So what's the difference here? Well, while the child was alive, David explains, he had a glimmer, a hope of living. God could heal him. God could cure him. And so I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I mourned and I fasted and I prayed some more and I asked God, because the child's heart is still beating and he's still breathing, there's a glimmer of hope that the Lord will heal him and save him. So I mourned with all my heart and soul and energy. Now the child is dead. That's it. Now he is dead. The Lord isn't going to bring him back from the dead. So what's the point of my mourning anymore? Will my mourning bring my child back? No. Will my mourning help me? No. I'm happy. He's thinking of heaven. He's happy that his child is in heaven. But the fact of the matter is, David knows that while the child is alive, he has opportunity to plead with God, that God will allow his child to live. Well, when the child's dead, it's done. There is no more pleading with God that his child. Yes, he might be sad, but that's what he's trying to show his servants here. So, David was willing after his sin. He had confessed his sin. He said how sorrowful he was. We read that in Psalm 51 today for devotions. He said what David said. Now David can rest. The child is dead. There's nothing I can ask the Lord to do anymore. I am content with what went on. I am content with the wisdom of God. God knows what is best, and He has taken the child from me now, and that I will be content with. That's a good example for you and me. When things don't exactly go our way, like maybe a decision mom and dad made. Maybe they had to change some plans up. Maybe the calendar didn't work out exactly how you wanted it to work. Well, we have to be content with that. We have to be happy with that. So, we read there already in Psalm 51 how deep David felt in his sin. We talked about that. A broken spirit and a contrite heart. That is what is needed when we sin. We need to ask God for our forgiveness. We need to go to Him saying how great a sinner we are. And that way we experience true blessings. Because then when we confess our sin to God, He forgives us. And God doesn't leave us in our sin. And God did not leave David here either. Although he had sinned with Bathsheba, the Lord draws him out, forgives him, and David can now go on with his life. So that's ours too. Although we sin, and sometimes our sins may be great, may you know God will forgive your sins. He won't leave you in that sin indefinitely when we properly ask the Lord to forgive us of those sins. So that's a beautiful thing.